Welcome to the first session of Screenwriting Certificate course. And in this session, what we are going to look at is cinematic stories, forms, and structure. Let's get started. So, first things that would come up whenever we look at uh, script writing or screenwriting is what is a story? Okay, so there is a difference between a story and a cinematic story, and we are going to look at the various differences and let's see how this thing works. So what is a story and where does it come from? A story is an account of incidents or events, a narrative that is either true or fictitious, in prose or verse, designed to interest, amuse, instruct the hearer or reader. This is what a story is, not necessarily a cinematic story. So whenever we look at a narrative, we know that it is designed largely for people. Okay, stories has stories carry significant potential in driving the audience or driving the reader or the hearer's interest. And whenever we try to define, we need to look at what a story is from the point of view of literature, from a point of view of cinema, and then see if there are differences. So, a story or a narrative is a connected series of events through words, that is, written word or spoken word, imagery, that is, still or moving, which is what comes in the context of cinema, then body language, performance, music, or any other form of communication. You can tell a story about anything, literally anything, and events described can be real or imaginary. You can borrow from your own life and try and come up with a story, or cook up a story which has got imaginary characters and imaginary settings, covering both fiction as well as non-fiction elements, and leave no topic, genre, or style untouched. So whenever we look at story or the universe of stories, um, you know that it's all encompassing and all these things are integrated into it. There are stories about all things and all times, past, present, future. If you navigate through several stories, you will know that stories come from history, stories come from present time that we're experiencing, and stories are also written about an anticipated future that the storyteller has imagined. Whenever you are telling somebody about series of events, you are telling a story, no matter what the subject nor when they occurred. Doesn't really matter. As such, stories are of great value to human culture and are some of the oldest and most important parts of life. You can sometimes tell a story in just one line. Okay, this is what happens if somebody asks you what happened. You say something that could be possibly a story that might not have any kind of structural truth to it. Could just be a line that you would cook up and come up and just tell. The girl met the love of her life and lived happily until the day she died. Or it could be more detailed. When the girl was 22, she met the love of her life. It was the last day of college, and when she saw him, she knew he was the one she was going to be with forever. And the boy knew the same. After graduation, the boy and girl ran away together to elope. They lived together happily for the rest of their lives. This is something that is a story. It could have been told, like I had mentioned earlier, in just one line, or you can just expand on it and then give the characters dimensions by introducing them um, in a particular setting, talk a bit about the age, what they're doing, so on and so forth. So as and when you proceed with the nature of events or the incidents that would occur in their lives or that they would experience, that would give us a finer understanding of how this story could possibly proceed. Now, really, even the second example is just a tiny story. You can tell it in all kinds of ways and of all different lengths, from one line to a series of novels. After all, if the couple lived an entire lifetime together, there would be countless events that together make up the story of their life. So, drawing from the incidents and events of their life, you may proceed along and try to elaborate and expand on different parts of their life uh, which you think is significant as a storyteller. How do we tell a story? We tell a story by using a story in the most natural things um, that occurs to us every day. And although you may not actively think about it, whenever you try to tell a story, what you do is you choose a perspective. Um, you hold on to a narrative form, which basically means that the narrator, not necessarily author, is telling the story to an audience from a certain perspective. You require this element. You require to tell a story from somebody's perspective. Now, that somebody might or might not be the author of the story. It could be a narrator which has been introduced, who has been introduced by the author to take the story forward. He or she is trying to tell the story. You would come across numerous stories where you would find a narrator trying to tell a story. It has happened in Bahubali. If you talk about cinema, it has happened in so many other stories that you would experience. So what they are trying to do is they are telling the story to the audience from a certain perspective. When you are telling a story to your friends, you are the narrator, but the perspective may or may not be yours. Okay, if you are the narrator, you could bring in some other character and trying to talk about that character's life. At that point in time, you are giving the perspective of the character. So that leads to different narrative styles or ways to tell a story. It could be in first person or third person narration, depending on how you want to tell the story. So choosing a perspective to tell a story is extremely crucial. What else is included in a story? A story must include a plot. What is a plot? This is the main series of events within a story and affects what kind of story it is. It gives us a nature of the story. It offers us some sort of an insight into the nature of the story. So basically looking at the main series of the events within the story that would affect the proceedings in the narrative. Okay, the story also need to include characters. Characters are people, things, concepts, animals within a story, whose lives unfold within the story, and there's something that gives us a perspective about how they have lived within the story and how what is their movement within the story from stage A to stage B and stage B to stage C. Then a story must include a setting. A setting is something that is based on time and place of the story. Where are you basing the story and when are you basing the story? Okay, as a storyteller, you need to be aware of the setting, what we call a zeitgeist, you know, in cinematic terms. Okay, so are you trying to tell a story about 2020? Is your story based in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, or are you trying to tell a story about 1942 or partition of India, so on and so forth? So that gives us a perspective about the, the time in which your narrative is based. Then the place. Where is your story based? Is your story based in Africa? Is your story based in 19th century France? Is your story based in Hyderabad? Depending on how you want to take the story forward. So setting up the characters and the setting in the timeline is something that is extremely crucial, and it helps you to set the events in some kind of a logical order. So once you have a time and place set and you have the characters, then characters will do things within that time frame and in that place. And whenever they try to do something, their movements or their actions are going to give you some sort of a logic to proceed forward in the story. And it also allows the readers or the viewers to understand the natural possibilities of how the story is progressing. When do we tell a story? Well, the simplest answer is all the time. We tell stories all the time to all the people, but more specifically, we tell stories when we want to report events, and usually we want to report them for a purpose. So you can use stories to share memories of your own past. You want to recount something from experiences that you have had in the past. You can draw from there, from your memories. Then you can talk about your daily life to somebody who is not familiar with it. Then you can tell stories because you want to entertain others. You can tell stories to teach. It's a great teaching tool. You can take up any complex material or theory or ism and try to kind of see how you can fit into a narrative and try to give the learnings. Then you can tell a story by sharing news events and um, current events. Then you can tell stories to explain history, culture, and religion. You come across numerous stories across formats, be it in novel, be it in cinema, that you get a glimpse or a reflection of a particular, space's history or the culture or religion. Then you also tell stories when you want to pass on customs and cultures to the next generation or to the generations or people who are not familiar with this. So you want to acquaint them with your custom and culture or custom and culture of a particular geography. You try to tell that story and integrate these things. Then stories are told to also provide some sort of a context or the other, context to events, context to incidents, context to news. You try to tell stories by providing some sort of a context. Then you are telling stories or you want to tell stories also to persuade others. Okay, that's a constant activity that we engage in subconsciously. So we tend to do so by persuading others. We use storytelling as as an incredible tool to persuade others or motivate others in one way or the other about a certain thing. Then stories for the screen. Okay, so when we talk about stories from the screen, essentially what means is writing stories for the screen. Okay, so notion of how screen stories operate. For example, most of us are pretty clear that we like particular movie genres. It might be romantic comedies. We might hate science fictions, or some of us might hate romantic comedies and love science fictions. So we tend to have some sort of an idea about the genre that produces certain kind of a response within us. For example, comedies make us laugh. Okay, we tend to look at comedy, we try and accept that um, great comic timings make us laugh. Horror movies scare us. And similarly, there are several genres of movies that tend to generate some sort of an emotion or the other. So what happens is when you are going to, uh, you know, consume a particular story, then we can preempt what to expect from the story. We have more or less some sort of an idea. And we also instinctively know the pace and rhythm of the movies. Okay, we know that, okay, this is how it is going to be, barring few exceptions. We know the common qualities. Those common qualities in cinematic stories are called conventions. And that can happen in our favorite genres, and we know what the story's primary question is, which means what is this about? What is this story about? How this story is going to end, or how this film is going to end. We unconsciously know that other aspects of movies can also usually happen, but not always. Let me give you an example. We know that the hero will be tested before he or she earns, the happy ending, which is something that we often tend to look forward in mainstream films, and that our major characters will usually change or develop over the course of a film. Because if that transition or that movement is not happening, then the story is not progressing. Then it becomes boring for the audience to navigate through or to go through that. So other thing is what the mainstream cinema does most of the times is it also kind of builds a subconscious expression within it that love always seems to win out. And we are constantly engaging in this act of looking for that successful love stories. Okay, so there's nothing that is hidden to you. Because you have experienced stories from across the world over a period of time in novels, in literature, in drama, in plays, and in cinema, that we tend to, um, you know, proceed accordingly with the kind of movement that would happen within the story. So what a screenwriter's job is to craft a story that responds to this mix of familiar conventions and the audience expectations. So as a writer, you have to keep the audience in mind. Who are you writing for? If you're writing a children's drama, you need to keep a certain conventions um, intact. If you're writing for adult audience, what you need to follow and understand that cinema is also an industrial enterprise which require where there's a lot of money involved. So if you are writing and if you want to get paid for the kind of writing that you want to do for screen, you need to play around with the cinematic conventions or the writing conventions in such a way that would be accepted, it would feel fresh and original in one way or the other. Screenwriting is a dramatic form. Okay, so there is drama involved, and dramatic here would refer or be drawn from the play format. Okay, so what you are constantly doing is you are creating characters for actors to perform in front of the cameras. So for a screenplay is often similar to a script of a stage play. So whenever you look at a film script, you find some sort of commonality um, between that and is a stage play script. So it is constructed with dramatic action. So dramatic action is something that follows the character's movement from one aspect to other by through performances, a term that the character must do as a consequence. So it builds the story on a certain sort of causality. Okay, causality is like the word says, it's cause based. You need to follow the events from one stage to another by looking for some sort of a cause and effect. E.M. Foster once remarked that the king died and then the queen died is a story. Okay, so the king died and then the queen died is a story. The king died and then the queen died of grief is a plot. And most movies are built around plot. So it is the grief that allows us some sort of a causality. So queen died not because king died. Queen died because of grief, because of the death of the king. So whenever you are developing stories, cinematic stories, understand that it needs to move around plot one way or the other. You have to bring in some sort of a causality. It could be because of revenge, it could be because of love, it could be because of dreams, motivations. So you need to find that ground. And the story is constructed to take advantage of the considerable power of cinema. The visual experience happens to us. It can be grand, perhaps in the films of David Lean, overwhelming in the sci-fi worlds of Ridley Scott, and evocative, as in the films of Lenny Ramsey or Andrea Arnold. These are filmmakers whose universe we have experienced, and they evoke some sort of emotions within us or not, and offer us intense visual experiences. So understand that you have to construct the story by taking the advantage of what cinema can do, how it can traverse um, through the magic of imagination. You also need to understand that a movie story is told in cuts, which means there is an editing process that is involved. The film will be composed in many short fragments of action that come together. So it's basically the coming together of different sequences that makes the story. So the screenwriter uses this fragmentary process to shape the rhythm and pace of the story. So what is a fragmentary process? Process which is divided and looking at the pace and rhythm of the story, whether the movement of characters, whether the movement within the narrative or the events are following any kind of a fluidity or not. So this is something that you need to look at. And remember that the film at the end of the day would be made on the editing table. Uh, Finally, after the production process is over, but much before that, because you are as a screenwriter, your involvement will be largely in the pre-production process. Keep that in mind that you need not write a story in the most chronological fashion. You can devise the story in different ways. So the smarter writers also follow different tools and techniques in order to, fragment um, the narrative to give some sort of a rhythm and pace to the story. You want the movement to be fast, then you are designing or developing scenes and sequences which gives a faster nature to the narrative. So movies are able to multi-track. It can move stories within many ways. For example, we'll see action in one, then you can also hear speech in the story world and hear it as a voiceover. So these are the things that gives us an understanding of the dramatic form in terms of writing. It's also an external form. So we see what characters say and do, but we are not privy to their thoughts and feelings as you might be in novel. In novel, it's extremely descriptive, right? Everything is descriptive. Even the thoughts and feelings of the characters are described. But in cinema, the thoughts and actions thoughts and feelings of characters need to be expressed through action. Otherwise, it would not come up. So the internal journey of the characters are something that needs to be extremely paid attention to and written smartly. So, because unlike a novel, you are not leaving the audiences to imagination. In cinema, you are showing things. So you need to create action that implies the inner life of the character, something that is accessible to us. You need to create those sort of scenes and sequences through character movements, through dialogues, through other aspects where we get a reflection of what this character's life could possibly be. And whenever I'm talking about life, I'm talking about inner life, because the outer life is out there and it's external in nature, something that you write. So how do we try to, how can we take that internal journey into our character's life and see what sort of things can happen? In most cases, this is how it works. Movies work when the characters are compelling. So you tend to write compelling characters. If you want to become a better screenwriter, you need to develop characters which have got multiple layers, which have got complex relationship with their world, inner world and outer world, how they react, act, um, within certain sequences, within certain situations of life. So in most cases, as audience, we'll tend to empathize with characters so deeply that we become immersed in the action. Most of the time, relatability action. We become fans of characters. We tend to do the same thing that the characters do, or we fall in love with those characters. We tend to do so because we are constantly immersed in those kind of experiences that they offer. So it might not be a sympathetic character, such is the power of immersion, as we gladly empathize even with a sociopath or a murder, like a talented Mr. Ripley. The story is capable of pitting our heart against our minds, with our hearts usually winning. Most of the times, we know that this character is not the right character, yet we navigate towards, or we get attracted towards, um, or gravitate towards characters who are often, antagonistic in nature or of antagonistic actions, because they have some sort of a charisma, or you tend to have some sort of a subjective understanding around life, and you don't want to look at it from one single um, point of view, single understanding point of view. So that's the reason why you possibly relate to a character like Joker. Okay, though Joker has been one of the most celebrated antagonists in in the Batman series, for the first time when you see Joker the film, okay, you tend to empathize with Joker's character, because first time you are allowed to enter into the inner world of Joker, and you see the kind of pathetic life that he has had over a period of time, and you tend to not judge the character or his actions accordingly. Then developing stories, the problem for us as writers comes in finding and developing stories. This is something that happens most of the times. We tend to struggle quite a lot. Now, David Mamet, who is extremely celebrated playwright and filmmaker, once remarked that stories happen because somebody wants something and has trouble getting it. Um, so stories happen because somebody wants something and has trouble getting it. So you need to identify the somebody. You need to then look for what that somebody wants to achieve in life, and then look at the obstacles or hindrances he or she is experiencing while trying to achieve whatever he or she wants. And in that process, you will discover what a story is about. So I'll stop here, and in the next session, we are going to expand or elaborate on this. Thank you.